and welcome to a new video. My name is Smriti and today I want to talk to you about some of my favorite books of the year as well as my biggest surprises. Why I want to do this is because I've been seeing a lot of people on the internet doing this around this time of the year, and I really like their videos. I will link some of my favorite down below, but also because I am the sort of person that I am, I felt like I wanted to do this too, so here I am doing it. I realized though that if you have watched my channel quite a bit, you know sort of the books that I have really loved over this year because I have spoken about them incessantly and just continuously pitched them. So for the people who have been watching my content, I decided to make this content slightly different, where essentially what I'm going to be doing is, of course, telling you what the book is about, because there might be some new people watching this video. God knows, hi if you are one of them. But also telling you very critically what about the book that I really like, and who might not like this book. If I don't know, if there is a sort of person who might not like this book, then what might you not appreciate about it? And also just reading out a little snippet of the book just to give you an understanding of the writing and what the contents inside are. So I hope that that is good enough, because I have 5 books that really surprised me. These books are books that are 4.5 stars ish, but I really like them and I really want to talk to you about them. And the other 5 are some of my 5-star reads. I've of course had more 5-star reads, but I feel like these 5 are the ones that I would definitely recommend the most. So 10 books in total. Let's get into it. So we're starting off with my most surprising reads, and I want to start off with When I Hid My Caste and Other Stories by Baburao Bagal, which is translated from Marathi to English by Jerry Pinto. Now this one I was caught by surprise because a lot of people had said that it's a really good book and it's a really good collection of short stories, but when I started reading it, I was completely wowed. So just before we get into it, the book is about a collection of short stories, as you must have guessed, but it is about Dalits, which are people of a lower caste in India, and their stories. On to the things that I really liked about this book. I first of all loved the way that it was written. There were times in which the book described things like, for example, thundering down the rib cage of a stair, or saying things like, a woman adorned by the departing sun's warm love proceeded to the west and darkness fell. Just the way that these things were described, I felt like the descriptions and the imagery was absolutely beautiful, and I loved that the writing was simple but also so breathtaking in the way that these things were described. What I also really liked about this book was very well articulated in terms of the injustices that people are going through, but also covered some of the joys and happiness of these people as well. It wasn't just pure sadness. Another thing that I liked about it is that it was short, so I got through this book really fast, but also it made me think quite a lot, even though the length was really short, but it was very enjoyable to read. Why you may not like this book, I don't know. If you are not a fan of short stories and prefer long form, this might not be for you. If you are not quite clued into the Dalit struggle, well, this still might be for you, because it's still interesting stories. And what I think that it does well is also give you a bit of context with some footnotes. So yeah, I think that this should be good for you, unless you are extremely Brahmanical and don't want to read about other people's experiences. The second biggest surprise of the year is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Okinye Braithwaite. You'll see the name here of the author. I thought that this book was so delightful and interesting. Essentially, it is told from the perspective of this woman who lives in Nigeria. She lives with her mother and her younger sister. Her younger sister is beautiful. She is not as beautiful as her younger sister and is known to be quite plain. And she is a nurse, but her sister has a habit of killing all of her exes or all of her boyfriends. Basically, they become exes once they are killed. spoiled, but yeah. And she is then called upon to save her sister from all of these things that she does. So far she's killed 3 people, and now she has her eyes set on this doctor who the main character is in love with but hasn't done anything about. So basically it goes from there. And I thought that this book was just very, very funny. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I thought that the main character had this wit about her, and just the way that like she described things was just weirdly funny, like unintentionally funny. There were a bunch of things that the main character felt that I felt too, and the things that she said I said too. For example, in the very first few pages she says Google is your friend to someone, and that is a phrase that I use quite a lot. So I was very happy with that aspect of things. Also, the chapters are really, really short, so I really enjoyed that as well, because I feel like short chapters does this thing to you where you can read the book way faster. However, in terms of things that you might not like about this book, I think there are quite a few, because there are a lot of people who have not liked this book, and that is because when people first start reading it, they think that it's going to be a thriller. It is not. It is not a thriller under any circumstance. It's more of a character study and more of just an understanding of how people may react to certain situations. So it's more just about that. It's also more about like sister dynamics, or just like family dynamics and how you kind of deal with that, which I think is interesting. But if you are expecting it to be like a serial killing thrillery book, then this is not that. The characters also are quite unlikable. I personally didn't think so, but I can understand that people might find them to be unlikable, so that is another thing to keep in mind. Also, there is no like real resolution per se, so also keep that in mind when getting into it. But just to describe to you how funny and witty I thought this book was, here is an example. There never seemed to be much point in masking my imperfections. It's as futile as using air freshener when you leave the toilet. It just inevitably ends up smelling like perfumed shit. So you see what I mean? It's smart, but it's also funny. And like, I don't know, that I really liked about this book, and which is why it was one of my most surprising books of the year, because a lot of people said that it's not going to be that great, but I really enjoyed it. My third most surprising book is going to have to be Indian Summer by Alex von Tunzelman. This is a non-fiction historical book, like a history book, and I didn't think that I would like a history book, even though history was one of my favorite subjects in school. I don't really like reading too much about history in like regular life, but this book was highly recommended to me by Jyotsna from Jyotsna's Bookscapades, and I gave it a shot and started reading it and absolutely fell in love. This basically describes the time of the summer right before the partition of India, Pakistan, and subsequently Bangladesh. It focuses on the 5 main players in this, which is the 2 Mountbattens, which are Louis Mountbatten and Edwina Mountbatten, as well as Nehru, Gandhi, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So these are the 5 people that it focuses on. And one thing that I really enjoyed about this book was how like character focused or people focused it was. It talks about what happened and this huge thing that took place, and of course I've always read of the partition and the things that happened right before the partition or during the partition or after the partition based on like things that happened, but I never read it in terms of like the people that made it happen or what they were doing during this time. So I thought that it was very informative, but also it gave me a better picture of these 5 big main players in like this like thing that happened in our history, and I thought that was really, really interesting. I also really liked the way that it was written. It was written like in a very easy-going sort of way, sort of like a fictional book almost, and I just thought that it was very easy to sort of read. And clearly she's done a lot of research because she cites a lot of examples which are also funny and interesting and like just things I never knew before. people might not enjoy this book if you don't like history or just don't care about the Indian partition that took place in our subcontinent. If this is not a subject that you are heavily interested in, then like this might not be for you. But even if you are remotely interested, I think that this will be a good read. If you are not fans of like the Nehrus, then this probably isn't going to be good for you because it speaks well of the Nehrus, but I think it'll give you like a good understanding of what exactly happened. This book also does have like some salacious aspects of it, which is basically talking about the relationship that may have taken place with Edwina and Nehru. So if you are not interested in a little bit of gossip even, then like this is not for you, but I liked that aspect of it. And just to read out the very first like paragraph of this, which like is just like a oh moment, is this, and it says, in the beginning there were two nations. One was a vast, mighty and magnificent empire, brilliantly organized and culturally unified, which dominated a massive swath of the earth. The other was an underdeveloped, semi-feudal realm, riven by religious factionism and barely able to feed its illiterate, diseased and stinking masses. The first was India, the second was England. Just like such a like amazing moment. I just loved the way that like this was written and that how that was conveyed. I think that it clearly made a lasting impact on me from the amount that I have tabbed this book. I really learned quite a lot, and this was such a surprise to me because I did not think that a history book would be one of my favorites of the year. Talking about a genre of a book that I didn't think would be one of my favorites of the year is sci-fi, and a book that I read is Dawn by Octavia E. Butler. This is part of a trilogy called The Lilith's Brood, if I'm not mistaken, and it basically follows Lilith in this book, who is a human that has survived sort of an apocalypse that has happened on Earth because we decided to bomb each other. Like basically there was this huge nuclear war, but there are few humans that have survived, and an alien species have basically taken them and put them into like this sleep on their ship while Earth sort of recuperates, and they sort of bring them back to consciousness at some point of time and try to like talk to them and tell them what's happening. But of course, like people react to aliens and this whole like thing in very different sort of ways. So essentially that's what we see through this book, how people and humans react to what's happening and what these aliens have in mind for the like humanity post all of this. And I just thought that it was really interesting. What I loved about this book was, one, the way that it was written. It was not something like concept wise that I'd ever sort of thought of before, so just the whole idea itself was so interesting, and the way like she described the aliens, it was so well thought of. It was not something that I had ever imagined. It was just really smart in terms of like this alien form that she was describing. That was really interesting. Also, the conversations that the aliens and like Lilith had were really interesting because it gave you like an outsider's perspective of like how humans behave. So for example, it says intelligence does enable you to deny facts you dislike, but your denial doesn't matter. A cancer growing in someone's body will go on growing in spite of denial. And like these are the sort of things like and conversations that they have that I found really interesting. Another aspect of it that I really liked was just how generally humans would react to things. I thought that that was done very well. Like there were different sort of perspectives and different sort of ways that a person may react to an alien species and like what they have in mind, and that was done really well. And I just think that Octavia E. Butler had this whole thing of like fully understanding the human like tendencies and like just putting that into a book, and I just thought that was awesome. People who may not like this, if you are not a fan of like just sci-fi fantasy, or like I think you still might like this book because I feel like it's much more than that. However, if you absolutely cannot read about like aliens or different life forms or whatever, then like maybe stay away from this book. And yeah, maybe if you aren't into like a series or whatever, maybe this is not for you either. But like I have so far just read the first book, and I probably will be reading the second and third book because I enjoyed it. But like I don't think it's necessary for you to read the second and third book. It doesn't end on like a cliffhanger for you to be like, oh my god, like I need to read the next book in order to enjoy the first book. It's not like that, so I think you should be fine. So the last book that I want to talk to you about in the most surprising bit is Shit Cassandra Saw and Other Stories by Gwen E. Kirby. This is a collection of short stories that, first of all, I thought the cover was just freaking gorgeous, and that's why I wanted to read it. I also heard that the writing was really weird in terms of like the different sort of ways that the author had written these short stories were really interesting and like form breaking. So I wanted to read it. So yeah, I did, and my friend Vivek let me borrow his book. Which is why I don't have it with me right now. But essentially, what I loved about this book was just how form breaking it was. One, because it was something that I had never read before. I was honestly jealous of the author while I was reading it, because I was like, how do you come up with this sort of stuff? I wish I had that sort of brain to like come up with like talking about a person's life through a Yelp review. Like that's just so interesting. Or like coming up with like the concept of these radioactive cockroaches that are biting these women and therefore empowering them with these superpowers that make them feel more comfortable in their skin and not be so afraid of like the men in the world and stuff like that. Like I was just like, what? How are you thinking of these things? I just thought that was really interesting. So yeah, that's that. But also I felt like it was really funny and just like in this biting sort of way, which I don't think is meant to be taken too seriously, but I just felt like it was just my sort of sense of humor. Maybe it's a very millennial thing, but yeah, I just really enjoyed that aspect of it as well. Also, the short stories were quite short because they are short stories, and I just felt like it was a sort of like collection that I had never quite read before. So I really enjoyed that, as well as the feminist aspect of this book. Now, why people may not enjoy this book is because it is feminist for sure. Also, the humor may or may not work for you if you are not a fan of like dark humor perhaps, or like biting humor. I don't know if that made any sense to you, but like that's one. Also, if you're not a fan of short stories, then like this is not a sort of thing that had like huge plots or anything like that. It was just like these small little snippets of like things happening in general. So just to give you an example, as I said, like there was this part, like the short story, where essentially there are these cockroaches, these radioactive cockroaches, which have started biting women, and it gives them like this superpower. So essentially, we have like little snippets of, for example, this short story collection. So it's called A Few Normal Things That Happen a Lot. A woman walks down the street and a man tells her to smile. When she smiles, she reveals a mouthful of fangs. She bites off the man's hand, cracks the bones and spits them out, and accidentally swallows his wedding ring, which gives her indigestion. So, as you can see, just from this one example, it can be quite a lot, but also I thought that it was very funny, because like as a woman who gets told to smile quite a lot, generally on the streets, I too would like to basically bite someone's hand off or like head off or whatever. So yeah, so I just like, this is the example of what you may like or what you may not like of some of my biggest surprises of the year so far. Let us move on to my best books now. So with my favorite books of the year, I want to start off with Assembly by Natasha Brown, because this is a really short book, but it really took me by surprise. Essentially, we are following this black woman in Britain who is has gotten some interesting news which may affect her life, but at the same point of time, she is going to her white boyfriend's family manor of sorts, or like country home, for like this party. And she's never been to this house before, but she has met the parents, and it's just her talking about like things happening in her life, but also like the things that she has to deal with being black or being from like a colonized country in this world. And like, just I just thought that it was really well done. One, in terms of the writing and how powerful it was. Two, in terms of the various themes that were sort of covered in this book, in a really short period of time, and all the things that Natasha Brown had to say. There were a lot of things where I was just like, fuck yeah, like being from like a Commonwealth country, right? There are a lot of times we felt these things towards the Great Britain, and just the way that like they deal with the rest of like the Commonwealth countries, and how they look down upon us or whatever it may be, and how they think of us. So let me just read out one bit that I think was beautifully done. So it says, the answer is assimilation. Always the pressure is there. Assimilate, assimilate. Dissolve yourself into the melting pot, then flow out, pour into the mold. Bend your bones until they splinter and crack and you fit. Force yourself into their form. Assimilate, they say encouragingly, then frowning, then again and again, and always there, quiet, beneath the urging language of tolerance and cohesion, disappear, melt into London's multicultural soup. Just like, I thought that it was so powerful in the way that it was describing certain things that like we feel in the world today, but also just talking about like things that she's going through right now. And I think that that it was really smart and really well done. Now, you may not like this book because one, it is really short and just covers like about 100 to 120 maybe pages. So if you don't like books that don't have too much of a plot, then this might not be for you. Two, I feel like a person who may enjoy this book way more is a person who has like gone through these racist things themselves. I feel like this may resonate with you way more. If you think that this book is going to be light and an easy breezy read, then this is not it. Even though it was about like 100 pages, I took my time with it and really like took it in, and all the things that Natasha Brown was trying to say. So yeah, that's generally my thoughts for this book. My second favorite book of the year could also be one of my most surprising books of the year, but I think it was wonderful and brilliant, which is why it comes to my top 5 so far. And that is Shoko's Smile by Choi Un-young, translated by Ryu something. Wait, let me just be sure. Sung-ryu, yes. And this is a book translated from Korean to English, and I absolutely fell in love with it. It is basically a collection of short stories which talk about like Korean people, but also referencing socio or political things happening in Korea, or that have happened or that continue to happen till today. And I just thought that this book was, one, so well written. There were maybe some stories that like were okay for me, but most of them really like were super emotional, and really like struck a chord in my heart. Two, I thought that like I got to know so many things about Korea and like things happening that have happened there, that I didn't quite know before through these brilliantly told stories. Three, I just really liked the writing. It was simple but like beautifully articulated, and like the descriptions were lovely, and I loved that like it was so character focused as well. Like it was very like people focused, like you got to know these people, sort of, and I just really enjoyed all of these aspects of the book. Why you may not enjoy this book is if you want to read some happy stories. Most of these stories were very sad and had the themes of, essentially a lot of them were grief. So if that is something that you are not looking for, then maybe this book may not not be for you. If you are not interested in like translated fiction or like Korea in general, then again this may not be for you. But I thought that it didn't necessarily focus on Korea. Like you could read it just as like people and what they are going through as well. And it did have enough plot for you to be satisfied with it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one, and I thought that it was one of the best books I've read so far this year, which is why it's on this list. Next is a book that I just have kept talking about, and that is The Swimmers by Julie Otsuka. This is a book that I read in, I think, May, and I just have like not stopped talking about it since then, because I don't know, it's just a very, very simple book, but it just completely took me by surprise. And I'm afraid that I may have hyped it too much for people, that when they read it, they may not like it, because it is a very simple book. But anyway, what it is about is that the first two chapters follow these group of swimmers who essentially talk about their time swimming in like this underground swimming pool of sorts. So the first chapters are in like the collective we sound. So just to give you an example, this is like the sort of way that it describes things. So it says, in our real lives, we are overeaters, underachievers, dog walkers, cross-dressers, compulsive knitters, just one more row, secret hoarders, minor poets, trailing spouses, twins, vegans, mom, second-rate fashion designer, an undocumented immigrant, a nun, a Dane, a cop, an actor who just plays a cop on TV, and then it just goes on to describe various other things. But down below at the pool, we are only one of these three things: fast lane people, medium lane people, or the slow. And this, I think, has been seen in some of her previous works as well, which is, I think, Buddha in the Attic, which is a book that I want to read now that I have read this book and really enjoyed it. But the second aspect of this book, like the second part of this book, is about this one woman who is also part of this collective we before, who are these swimmers, who is Alice, who is slowly like losing her memory and like just not remembering things as much anymore. So it follows like her journey as she's like slowly forgetting things. And I, one, really enjoyed this book because I love swimming. So the first half of this book like was really enjoyable to me, because I was like really finding myself relate to a lot of these characters, or like even see a lot of the people who I have seen in like my swimming time on this earth, like just seeing people that I've like sort of related with, and yeah, I just really enjoyed that part. It really made me want to swim so badly. I was just like, oh my god, I want to jump into the pool right now. It just really made me miss that aspect of my life. And the second thing which I really liked about the book was just how like simple and understated it was. I felt like it was really interesting in terms of the writing, where the first half of it was like the collective we, and then after that we moved on to various different perspectives talking about Alice's life. So for example, one we get from like Alice herself, one we get from her daughter, one we get from like the facility or like the rule book of the facility that she is put into, and just like I just thought that it was really interesting in terms of the way that like that was done. So yeah, I really like the writing and the form itself. Also, the writing was very simple and understated. It wasn't like overtly trying to make you emotional or anything like that, but towards the end I did get very emotional, even though like it wasn't trying to do anything. Like, you know, you've read books in the past that have like purposely made you feel a certain way, you know what I mean? Like it feels like it's edging you towards this big crescendo of sorts, whereas in this book it didn't have that, but towards the end it made me feel so much that I was just sobbing. So yeah, that's what I feel like this book does. It's very, very understated, and it has like these little glimpses into a person's life, and what that might feel like. So number one, I think the reason why you may not enjoy this book is because if you are a person who has dealt with a loved one going through this, where they are dealing with Alzheimer's or just generally like forgetting because of old age and stuff like that, this might be a little triggering for you, because like it describes this. Two, if you are a person who like wants more plot, then this might not be a thing for you as well, because it follows more of a character and what they are going through. Or if you are hoping for like some extremely like dramatic things happening, then this is not that sort of book. That's very like simple and understated, and that's why I really enjoyed it. So yeah, those are overall my thoughts on The Swimmers. I'm gonna stop talking about this book now because I have talked about it way too much, and move on to the other two books that I've talked way too much about. The first one being If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. This book has like, it just is everything. It basically follows Fonny and Tish, who are two black people in New York, and Fonny is put into jail because of a crime that he did not commit. Tish is his lover and is pregnant with his child, and it's about how they are young and dealing with this situation. It also follows their families, and yeah, it's a short book as well, which I enjoyed, but I also would have loved for this to be way longer and for us to see what happened towards the end, but I will get to that. This is a book that I thought was so well written. It is written by James Baldwin, who I think is like an absolutely brilliant writer. He was able to talk about so many things, and yet keep it so like brilliant and believable. Like, we speak about police brutality, we speak about racism, we speak about colorism, we speak about a bunch of things in this book, but it doesn't feel too heavy. I just thought that that was brilliantly done. I also really fell in love with the characters. He really does characters so well in this book. You really like either love them or hate them. They're just so well done. If you love like families or reading about families, then this book will definitely be a book that you fall in love with. And yeah, I would also highly recommend the audiobook, which is narrated by Barney Turpin. I think that that also really added to my experience with this one. Now, in terms of the things that I didn't like, one of the things that I sort of spoke about was that like there was no like thing in the end where we've understood what happens to Fonny. So there's no like resolution per se, so you sort of have to guess. So if you're a person who like needs a resolution and needs to know what happens in the end, well, this might not be for you. If you are a person who doesn't like reading about like violence and like police brutality and like racism, etc. right now, then that's totally understandable given everything that's going on. So again, this might be a book that would trigger some of those emotions. But overall, I don't see why you will not like this book. It is brilliantly written and short. Wish it would be longer, but yeah, this book was just everything for me, and I am going to read out one part of this book that like just shows how brilliantly well written it was. It says, "Time. The word told like the bells of the church. Tony was doing time. In 6 months' time, our baby would be here. Somewhere in time, Fonny and I had met. Somewhere in time, we had loved. Somewhere no longer in time, but now totally at time's mercy, we loved. Somewhere in time, Fonny paced a prison cell, his hair growing nappier and nappier. Somewhere in time, he stroked his chin, itching for a shave. Somewhere in time, he scratched his armpits, aching for a bath. Somewhere in time, he looked about him, knowing that he was being lied to, in time, with the convenience of time. In another time, he had feared life. Now he feared death. Somewhere in time." Just, I mean, like, so brilliant. I absolutely fell in love with the way that this book was written and all the things that it had to say. James Baldwin is a brilliant writer. I wish that he had written way more because, like, so good. And the last book that I want to talk to you about today is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Now, I have the physical book, but I don't have it with me right now because I have given it to my aunt, who I was like, please read this book. It's absolutely amazing. And like, I will probably be shoving this book down everyone's throat. So this book basically talks about Shakespeare's family. Though Shakespeare's name is never really put out there, like he's always referred to as the husband or the brother or the son or whatever. But essentially, we are following a timeline in which we are first getting to know about him and his love, and how he fell in love with this woman named Agnes, who is basically this girl who has lived on the outskirts of like society and like of the city. And she is basically like known to be a bit witchy, like she has all these potions and she has a connection with nature, etc. And I just loved the way that like that was sort of brought in terms of like this magical witchiness aspect of this world. And essentially we get to know about how they fall in love, and it's more about Agnes than it is about Shakespeare, so that's something to keep in mind about. And how it sort of builds on to how they have this family where they have three kids, one daughter and then two twins, a daughter and a son. So there's Judith and Hamnet. And Hamnet, essentially, we know from the beginning itself, has dies at some point of time. And we get to see what happens and what kind of made that happen, as well as like how they deal with the grief post. And I loved this book because I just thought that the way these people were one described was absolutely brilliant. I loved the characters. I absolutely fell in love with each and every one of them. For example, like Agnes was a character that I absolutely was rooting for all throughout. She has her elder daughter, I'm forgetting the name right now, but like she was like a bit annoying, but after a certain period of time you could understand why she was behaving the way that she was. I also really liked Shakespeare as a character, even though he was not really named Shakespeare. I just really liked these characters and the way that they were described, as I've said. Two is the writing. It was magical and mystical and just so well done. I loved the way that like there was I don't know, just the way that it was written was so brilliant that I felt like envious of this writing. And I was like, while I was reading it, I was like, why will I even think of writing ever in my life? Because nothing will ever be the same as this. So if you want some brilliant writing and just like an example of like mastery, then this book is for you. Three, I really like the way grief was spoken about in this book. I feel like it was very well described in terms of like just the feelings that we feel if we have lost someone very, very close to us or very special to us. And I just felt like that was brilliantly sort of done. Now, why you may not like this book is, one, if you do not want to read about grief, or that's that. Two is the pacing was a bit slow. I have like heard from my friends that like they were waiting for the death to happen to see what would happen post. It's also sort of like you have to keep in mind that they're building up these characters and then the death sort of happens in the middle. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not a spoiler, it just we know that this happens. And yeah, I just thought that it is a little slow paced, but it is just beautifully done. So yeah, I think that's what I would keep in mind for this book. Now, there are a lot of lines in Hamnet that I could read out to you, but while I was going through my notes, there was one that stood out to me because I don't know, it just made me feel certain things. Now that I have read the book, it may not be as amazing for a person who's not read the book, but I don't know, let's see. It says, he feels again the sensation he has had all his life, that she is the other side to him, that they fit together, him and her, like two halves of a walnut, that without her he is incomplete, lost. He will carry an open wound down his side for the rest of his life, where she had been ripped out from him. How can he live without her? He cannot. It is like asking the heart to live without lungs, like tearing the moon out of the sky, asking the stars to do its work, like expecting the barley to grow without rain. I don't know, it just made me very emotional just thinking about it. Like this aspect of the book, like this part in which it is, just made me very emotional. And I just really enjoyed it. So those were my five biggest surprises as well as my five favorites. Let me know what you thought of these books. If you have read these books, please tell me what you thought of them down in the comments. If you have any suggestions for me or any recommendations for me, please again put them down in the comments. And again, I hope that you are doing really well. And do subscribe or like this video if you want to, and I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.